Conversation focused on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation focused on Grasstops and key contact programs and entitled Are Grasstops Networks an Advantageous and Crucial Advocacy Strategy? I'm David Lusk, founder of Key Advocacy, and I have the honor of moderating today's virtual discussion featuring a talented panel of experts who I have the pleasure of introducing to all of you in just a moment. I serve on ASAE's Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Advisory Council, also known as GRAPAC, which is pleased to be hosting today's event. I'm also the rising vice chair of the GRAPAC for the coming 2021-2022 term. For those of you joining us today for the first time, the Government Relations and Advocacy Professionals Advisory Council is the volunteer leadership group for ASAE's community of more than 2,000 association government affairs professionals nationwide. The council's work includes delivering content for ASAE's website and various publications, as well as a slate of virtual learning opportunities for the association community focused on improving the effectiveness of advocacy and government affairs efforts. This peer-to-peer information sharing has proven most helpful as associations have navigated the challenges presented since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that said, before we get started today, I would like to take a moment and introduce Mary Kate Cunningham, Senior Vice President of Public Policy at ASAE, who will share a few housekeeping items with us. Mary Kate.
Thanks so much, David, and thank you for moderating and to all of our panelists. This session is being recorded. It's worth 1 CAE credit hour. We'll send it out afterwards. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, Mary Kate. Now I'd like to go ahead and bring in today's panelists. And just to run through the agenda real quick, we'll do introductions. We'll have a 4-part panel discussion. We'll do the attendee Q&A if any of you have questions, and then we'll run over some tips that we all pulled together to help you make successful Grasstops initiatives at your organizations. So that being said, as I look at our panel, Kimberly Jones serves as the Executive Vice President at the Council for Opportunity and Education. In this role, she oversees the day-to-day operations of the Council, including representation of students served by the federal TRIO programs before Congress, the U.S. Department of Education, and all government agencies. Oversight of the program and professional development offerings for college access and success professionals, the organization's fiscal policies and information technology, and the development and implementation of all print and digital communications of COE. A graduate of Yale University and the Georgetown University Law Center, in 1999, Kimberly was named a Harry S. Truman Scholar, was named in 2016 as one of the 40 under 40 nation's best advocates by the National Bar Association, and also received the organization's Excellence in Activism Award. In 2018, she was selected for the Diversity Executive Leadership Program sponsored by ASAE, and recently earned the credential of Certified Association Executive. Oyango Snell is a professional speaker, certified association executive, and currently serves as Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for the Western States Petroleum Association, an association representing the collective interests of energy companies in California, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada. Oyango oversees WSPA's legal team and advises the President and CEO and Board of Directors on corporate governance, antitrust compliance, and environmental law issues. As an advocate for women and ethnic minorities, he also leads WSPA's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Oyango's professional career includes working in state government relations in both the public and private sectors in Columbus, Ohio, which included a bid for the Ohio State Senate. He earned his law degree at The Ohio State University, holds a Master's of Business Administration from Franklin University, and completed his undergraduate studies at Central State University, a historically Black college in Wilberforce, Ohio. He and his wife, Shauna, are the proud parents of 2 boys, Brennan and Carter. And another panelist is my colleague on the GRAPAC, Maria Matthews. Maria recently joined the Policy and Advocacy Group at New Classrooms, whose mission is to create and inspire better ways to give every student an educational foundation for lifelong success. In her prior role at the American Society of Civil Engineers, Maria's responsibilities included working with region, section, and branch leaders to advance the Society's public policy priorities at the state capitol and on Capitol Hill. She nurtured ASCE's Key Contact and Advocacy Captain programs and oversaw the Society's Government Relations University, which provided training to Grasstops and grassroots advocates. A certified association executive, Maria obtained her BA in International Studies from American University, where she also minored in Spanish language. A proud mom of two when not in the office, she enjoys getting messy in the kitchen with the kids. And as noted, I'm David Lusk. I'm with Key Advocacy, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. Key Advocacy specializes in training advocates for federal and state Capitol Hill days, as well as year-round engagement. We also help organizations improve their overall grassroots efforts. And we have great familiarity with Grasstops programs, having worked on the initiatives of clients such as the American Farm Bureau Federation, American Library Association, and American Medical Association. And I've also launched initiatives at the Society for Human Resource Management, their SHRM advocacy team, and worked on the Alzheimer's Association's Ambassador Program. So as you can see, I'm working with quite an esteemed panel here today that is well-versed in how to implement advanced advocacy initiatives and just how such networks can benefit an organization's policy efforts. So we'd like today's online forum to be conversational. I'll pose several questions to each panelist. Those attending the live session are welcome to submit any questions or comments that you have for us via the chat box, and I'll do my best to incorporate those into today's dialogue. So with that, to lead us off, I have two things that are somewhat related that I'd like to review. First, could each of you take a few minutes to provide some background on how your organization is structured? And then second, how does your organization define or approach Grasstops or key contacts? So Kimberly, let's start by hearing from your organization.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. And yes, I'm with the Council for Opportunity and Education, SEA. We are the council, and we advocate for students who are from low-income families, potential first-generation college graduates served by the federal TRIO programs. And so the way our structure is set up, we have a national office in Washington, D.C., and our board of directors is actually comprised of representatives of our 10 regional associations. And so the associations themselves are all geographic. They're actually based on the regions. Prior to the founding of the Department of Education, there were regional satellite offices that used to operate and govern our programs. And so our structure was built around that. We have 3 representatives from each of those regional associations serving on our board. And then within that, we also have chapter presidents for each of the state. And in some cases, we have some states that work together. So we have something called MO-CANI, our Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska chapter. And California is so huge that they've broken themselves into 3 different chapters. So all in all, besides our 30-member board of directors, we have about 52, 53 local chapter affiliates. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights, Kimberly. Oyango, could we hear a little bit about WSPA next, please?
Sure. So WISPA, WSPA is, I think, a radio station. So we adopted WISPA to distinguish ourselves. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. David, with that introduction, I want to take you everywhere I go because you make me sound much, much greater than who I am and what I do, but much appreciated. Great to be here with everyone. So WISPA is an organization, it was founded in 1907, particularly to serve as the legislative, regulatory, and legal advocacy arm for the energy industry, more focused in the petroleum and natural gas space. But over the years and with time, and especially being in California, petroleum and natural gas has expanded to many other forms of energy. We have about 15 members. Some are integrated companies engaged in all parts or all segments of energy, from production and oil extraction to marketing and transportation to refining oil and petroleum products, as well as natural gas. If you follow anything about in California about climate change and its politics, you'll know that our energy companies are more than just the fossil fuel industry, partly because of demand, but also because of the right thing to do from a climate change perspective. So a number of our members are engaged in alternative energy, renewable sources, and other things of that nature. From a structure perspective, we have about 15 members. We have associate members, about say 300 or 400 associate members in the 5 states that you mentioned earlier, David, of California, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. From a structural perspective, we don't have any affiliate chapters. Our organization is pretty much run by those 15 members. Our largest committee will be our government affairs committee, and then our legal committee. And then we have separate government affairs committees in the various states that we operate in. So that's pretty much how we're structured and set up. A great organization, one of the strongest lobbying organizations in the state of California and in the other states that we operate in. And some of the key topics of this discussion is going to be interesting to get into as we kind of look at our different structures and how we still focus on Grasstops related issues. So I'll turn it back over to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you. Maria, could we please hear a little bit about your experiences with Grasstops, please?
Thanks, David. As David noted, I'm currently with New Classrooms in the capacity of Director of Policy and Advocacy. I'm just in my infancy here, and our GR program actually itself is only a little bit older than my tenure. So I'm going to roll the clock back a bit and kind of speak to my time with the American Society of Civil Engineers. ASCE as an organization is chapter-based as well as has a national policy shop. So we work in not just on Capitol Hill at the national level, but we also, as David hinted, have regions, which are our largest geographic unit. Then we have our sections that represent the states or major metropolitan areas, and then our branches, our smallest unit. And so we can really drill down there to GR at the most local unit. So it is a challenge and also a benefit to have so many volunteers in so many pockets. We group them together through a key contact program, which is sort of our biggest bucket of grassroots advocates. And then we, in order to kind of develop a more well-trained, higher level, higher value advocacy volunteer, we developed our Advocacy Captains program, which is sort of a key contact on steroids, if you will. Those advocates we pulled out of the key contact program and through other leadership capacities that they may have filled at the region, section, or branch level, and provided them with a lot of training. And then occasionally we might find a superstar at our government relations university program, which is another way to help spread a culture of advocacy throughout the organization and make sure that our messages were reaching all corners of the organization.
Excellent. Great. Thank you for those insights. So our next topic, how do each of your organizations conduct outreach to your Grasstops? And what are the type of communication settings that you might use in doing that? You know, are you going beyond email engagement? So Oyango, why don't you start us off on this topic, please?
Yeah, so from a Grasstops perspective, David, you know, we kind of look at the distinction between the two, grassroots and Grasstops, but then we also combine them, so to speak. So from our perspective, our grassroots those are the folks who are considered our policy position army. Those are the people that pound the pavement. They write the emails, they make the phone calls, they show up, they're disruptors when it comes to advocating our issues. And some of those individuals are also part of our Grasstops connections, you know, but when we look at our Grasstops piece, it's sort of like the dating game. We're trying to match people who have key relationships with policymakers from that bunch to be able to have more one-on-one or smaller focus group sit downs with some of the key policymakers that can really be, you know, help our policymakers understand how some of the issues that they're pushing or advocating for will impact not only their individual company interests, but the broader industry interests, as well as how those decisions will impact the communities that those key policymakers serve. Making a connection is very, very critical. So we have what's called a strategic alliance advocacy framework. And within that framework, we have a mission and approach, objectives, strategic initiatives, a solid infrastructure, which includes our partnership infrastructure. And that's run by a manager, a senior manager who's basically in charge of our outreach and engagement and partnerships. We look at our direct stakeholders as well as our strategic initiatives and then our alliance and engagement. And within that partnership structure, there's a number of various segments of various industries rather that we partner with, from labor to business to seniors and other consumer-based groups. We look to be very, very focused in ensuring that our policies or our positions, rather, those who are impacted by it from historically marginalized groups also have a voice, particularly in the African-American community, Hispanic and Latino community, where there is a lot of environmental justice issues. Contrary to popular belief, these are issues that our individual companies are very much engaged in, particularly through the trade association. So we look at all of that and we look for those key members within those segments who have relationships with some of the policymakers at various levels that we're looking at, whether it's local or county-based issues or state issues. And we create little clusters and groups that come from out of that army, that position policy army. And through the communication settings, I mean, there's a number of communications through our execution and mobilization strategies that we use, from email campaigns to well, because of the pandemic, we had to kind of transition to webinars and more electronic ways of gathering. We couldn't just gather at either our office or somewhere at the State House and rah everybody up and then pound the pavement and go knock on doors and then kind of break off and have some of those more strategic high-level meetings with some key policymakers. We have our legislative day like mostly every organization would have. And again, while we also invite those affiliates that I told you about, which is some of our major policy position army representatives, as well as our executives within our companies and their employees, we bring those folks all together, and we may communicate with them in those same forums to talk about the key issues that we're dealing with, and bring in other policymakers who we call our champions or friends, to try to help us get that message out. So it's a number of ways that we do that, but we found ourselves adapting and being flexible because of the pandemic and moving from that in-person, rally everybody up and then break off and have those individual communications to more email communications, more webinars, and really just trying to make sure we keep people engaged. Because the 2020 pandemic, it made people literally feel distant, not just socially, but politically, and any other elite you want to throw in there. People really felt distant. So trying to keep people together and engage in our issues while challenging is something that we think we did a decent job at.
Thank you, Oyango. Let's hear from Maria next on this, please.
Thanks. At ASAE, in communicating with our advocacy captains and our Grasstops folks broadly, we were primarily using web-based communications even prior to the pandemic, with advocacy captains spread across the majority of states. We had about 80 captains spread around about 45 or so states. Web-based communications is really the way for us to easily bring them together. We made sure that we were in a regular communications loop to make sure that they had all of the information that they needed in order to pass along to legislators, whether those were informally scheduled meetings that they had, or perhaps, these were more informal contacts, say they, their kids attend the same school, they're part of the same social clubs, they may happen to run into each other at the grocery store, and can have sort of an organic conversation. And weave in the infrastructure messages that we ask them to pass along to legislators. So it's a matter of keeping a good schedule, making sure that they have all of the pertinent inside baseball, be it a state or federal issue. And then occasionally, since our engineers represent a variety of specialties or technical expertise, we wanted to make sure that we were communicating the right information to the right folks. So if, for example, they had a specialty in water, we wanted to make sure that they were up to speed on all issues pertaining to water. If they were a road or bridge expert, we made sure they had information in that area. And then making sure that all of our materials, all of our fact sheets, all of the communications that went out to them were clearly understood, regardless of what their day-to-day responsibilities were, so that the road and bridge specialist could understand the nuances of all of the water issues, and then vice versa. So for us, it really was a lot of refinement and making sure that our Grasstops could always put their best foot forward in any situation.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Kimberly, let's hear a little bit about what COE does.
Sure. And so very similar to what Oyango mentioned and even what Maria mentioned, there's really a blending of work with our Grasstops and our grassroots community. Because we work with educators, many of them are not necessarily interested in the political sphere. They want to work with the students and they want to help them get to college, and that's their focus. And so a lot of our work is just about teaching folks, if you don't do the political advocacy piece, you may not be in a position to do the education piece. And so in terms of getting that across, we do a number of formal trainings throughout the year. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. But as far as structure in working with our Grasstops, for instance, our board meets quarterly. And we always make sure that our spring board meeting happens in Washington, D.C. Why? So that they can go to Capitol Hill to follow up on all the messages that our entire community shared during our spring fly-in, which is usually about a month or so beforehand. We also have monthly calls with each of our state chapter presidents, because again, we're trying to just keep people up to date on what's happening in Washington so they're aware and they can transmit that information to their membership. But like Maria said, a lot of it is just constant and trying to make an organic relationship blossom at the local level. And so we're always encouraging our members, we don't want to only ask for things when we need something. You don't only want to contact your members of Congress when you're in trouble. And so really zeroing in on the importance of getting your students in front of the member, or rather bringing the member to your students. It was difficult to do that during the pandemic, certainly, but that's a way of showing your legislators what the federal money is doing. And you're not advocating, you're just, you're really just saying, hey, look at the great work we're doing with this investment you've made. Also, keeping it personal. I think we all have mentioned in one regard or another email campaigns, and certainly, we have our database that breaks people up by district. And so if there's an important issue, we can look, okay, who is in the district represented by the folks in this committee, send them a message, but dang it, we got to pick up the phone afterwards. Because emails are easy to ignore. But when you get that personal phone call, especially if it's someone who they find it encouraging to get a call from the executive vice president at the national office to say, hey, we really need your help on issue X, Y, or Z. And frankly, even because of the type of work we do and how close-knit we are as the community, we form friendships that we even will take it to social media and text and say, like, I know I sent this person an email, but I'm not hearing back from them. So I'll pull up my phone and say, hey, sis, can you reach out to Congressman so-and-so's office about X, Y, and Z? Oh, sure, no problem. And again, just built on the relationship. So again, keeping it constant and helping people to get more comfortable with the idea. So when it is go time, they are ready to do it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Great insights. And we heard everyone touch upon communicating out to advocates, how we train our advocates to diversify their communications and personalized communications to the lawmakers. How often are we as an organization doing the same in how we reach out to our advocates themselves? So which then brings us to our next topic. Let's discuss training for your Grasstops. And I have another multi-part question here. Does your organization train your Grasstops any differently than your general advocates? And in a typical year, especially pre-pandemic, was this training in person or virtual? And is this training typically conducted as a one-off or a series of ongoing sessions? So let's turn this one over to Maria first, please.
Thanks, David. So pre-pandemic, our Grasstops trainings were in person. And then our grassroots trainings were a mix of in-person and web-based training. For our grassroots, I'll start with them at the bottom and kind of build upwards. For our grassroots folks, we typically brought them in through a government relations university. It was not required to be a part of the key contact program, but we found that was an excellent gateway to get folks excited about policy, especially those that were a little bit less familiar with it, or it did not touch them as much on a day-to-day basis. Our government relations university was a modular program, meaning we could do it in as little as an hour if our sections and branches wanted to squeeze it in at a monthly meeting or as part of a quarterly or annual conference, to as long as a full day training. And the idea was for the program to be a GR 101. It was a boot camp into not just all things public policy, but how ASAE engaged in the policy space to familiarize the members with policy protocols, all of our policy statements, where they could find these resources and how they could best utilize the DC office in engaging with their federal, state, or local legislators. Those folks that we identified as folks we wanted to bring into the Grasstops sphere then got vetted to participate in the Advocacy Captain program. And pre-pandemic, that was also an in-person training and was only done in person, and there was no virtual option for those folks. And we actually brought those folks to ASAE's DC office, and they got to spend the entire day with the various members of our team. They, got to spend half an hour to 45 minutes with our federal lobbyist, the same amount of time with our state team. They met with our public relations and media staff and got media trained as part of their role as a Grasstops member. We ran them through various simulations on how to understand a bill, how to not just obviously participate themselves in some of our advocacy campaigns, but how to then recruit and encourage others to join them in joining the Key Contact program, or just simply, clicking that button and being a passive advocate. Once we then sent them home after that full day of training, we then brought them back together on a quarterly basis. Because they were geographically spread, would target those calls. So we would get folks in clusters of states together that had sort of similar overlapping issues, and would give them regional policy briefings, do a little bit of fine tuning for that, to make sure that they understood what we needed them to do at that given moment, and kind of what tool in their arsenal, is best to leverage and do refresher. And then at our annual fly-in, we would bring them together for a big sort of full day refresher class. And we partnered with the Congressional Management Foundation to kind of help us with that. And that was sort of a way to give them a 201 or 301 type of advocacy experience to continue to refine those skills and make them even better advocates than they already were.
It's great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Kimberly, why don't you share COE's approach to training?
Sure.
Please.
So every year we have our policy seminar, which is essentially our legislative day, our Hill Day, what most organizations would call by that name. And of course, the centerpiece is the actual day on the Hill. But 2 days prior to that, we have sessions, as Marie mentioned, I'm going to borrow some of your language, sort of the legislative advocacy 101. And we've actually in more recent years have had to get creative, because we have folks who come back year after year after year. So we still have to provide the 101 level information for folks who are brand new, but also some upper tier information for folks who've literally done this for 10 and 20 years. So they don't get bored, that they still want to come and participate. But we generally have folks like the Congressional Management Foundation come through. We do panels featuring congressional staffers, actual members of Congress, former members of Congress, as well as training by our own staff about what to expect when you go on Capitol Hill, what sort of follow-up should happen once you leave Washington, D.C., because I always tell them, if you're just going to come for our policy seminar, go see some cherry blossoms. This is not a one-shot deal. And so that's really the centerpiece of what we do. And people really look forward to that event every year. One component of our policy seminar is what we call our Leadership Summit. That is a pre-conference, essentially, that's targeted towards the leaders of our state and regional associations. And that's more about the nuts and bolts of how you run a good association. And so we will have tracks within that pre-conference, and one of them is an advocacy track, where again, we'll have representatives from other similar organizations come in and talk about what are the best strategies and tools for being effective. How do you get your college or your university or your nonprofit agency more involved in advocacy on our issues? And so that's always been a hallmark event. In more recent years, we've actually begun something called the Executive Leadership Institute. This was birthed out of a desire to formalize a sort of an ad hoc partnership we had at the time with Princeton University. We had been working with them on a few small projects, and we said we really want to do something special because they, like many other high caliber institutions of higher education, are interested in increasing the number of low income and first generation students coming to their campus. At the same time, we wanted to do more intensive training for our Grasstops members. And so we conceived of the Executive Leadership Institute, which is essentially a 3.5, 4-day experience on an elite college campus. We had it at Princeton University the first year. The second year we had it at Cornell. The third year we had it at Yale. We had to postpone last year because of the pandemic, and it looks like we may have to postpone again this year, but we are in talks with other campuses to be future hosts. But essentially, it gives our host campus the opportunity to showcase what they offer for first generation low income students, both as freshmen and even as transfer students. And so for them, it's a wonderful opportunity, and it gives our folks exposure because many of them have never had the opportunity to go to this sort of institution, to be on the campus and to really feel welcomed. We went to Princeton, got a tour, and they got to tour Albert Einstein's classroom. At Yale, the president of the college sat and had dinner with us and welcomed us. And so that experience, that's kind of the pull to really get people to be incentivized to come. And when we're there, we do not get into the nuts and bolts of how do you advocate, how do you do this, how do you do that. We really talk about advocacy and leadership as a concept. And that's where we try to bring in some of our heaviest hitters. So for instance, we have a former board member who was in the Obama administration, and some workshops with some homework for everybody. We have folks come in to give them just simulations. Okay, here's an advocacy problem. Get in your group. How would you solve this? And usually we put them where they were presented. And that's an invitation-only event. We target the president-elects. So the folks who are going to be presidents in maybe 2 years of our local chapters. And so in that way, we're really trying to prime them for where they will be in a few years. And so they're really ready to go by the time they move into full leadership positions.
Excellent. Thank you. Oyango, can you please share your experiences with training your Grasstops, please?
Yeah, so I'm glad I went last here because Maria and Kimberly kind of gave a master class on how to program this space and area. This is one where I'm going to be very transparent. I believe our organization don't do as good of a job as we can in having more of a training program day in, day out throughout the year. Where we are good at is mobilizing for a key event or a key issue. And that's where our strength has been. So when there's an issue that we either are in support of or promoting, or an issue that we know will impact our industry, we're able to quickly mobilize our grassroots and our Grasstops army and educate them as to what the key implications of those issues are, what are the messaging issues, kind of do that broad-based advocacy piece that Kimberly just talked about. What does advocacy in general mean for us? Why this is important for us to exercise our voice and be able to ensure that all voices are heard at the table, not just certain segments of the industry or certain segments of the population or certain interest groups, that the energy industry also has an opportunity to have a seat at the table and voice its concerns and issues on those policies that impact us. We really do put a lot of emphasis in leveraging our partnerships, particularly with labor, the building trades here in California, and using their training apparatus from a political and advocacy perspective as to how they train their folks. So more or less, the association itself is not conducting, managing, and running these types of training components, but we're relying on our partners. Once we provide them with at least our thought process as to what we believe the overarching messaging points are, and then they take that and then decipher how those particular policy issues impact their own interests. For instance, when you're thinking of labor, most of the time it's jobs and a better lifestyle for their labor members. So when you talk about policies that's going to impact jobs and the economy overall, then in that instance, that's where you have a lot of those groups very engaged, very active, and are easily able to mobilize their people and communicate and articulate those messages through those types of trainings. Where, like I said, in starting off, where I think we can do a much, much better job is having that robust program year in, year out. So you don't have to have that start, stop every time a new issue comes up, because sometimes you lose some of those key grass tops and grassroots folks who were really engaged in your issue, and they kind of move on to something else because we all have full-time jobs and lives that we're trying to live. So we'd really like to maximize the opportunity to keep those folks engaged, especially when you look at it from the three-legged stool at which we're engaged in, and that's legal, regulatory, and legislative advocacy. And that's a key component, if anything, that I want folks to take away today, is that legal advocacy should be part of your government affairs strategy. We really leverage not only the threat or the development of litigation, but also amici activity and building coalition partners in that realm. I know not everybody is involved in litigation as heavily as the oil industry is, but thinking of the legal advocacy as part of your government affairs, folks, and looking at the coalitions and relationships that you need to build to help you in that component really helps us in our government affairs strategy and advocacy overall. No, you can't go talk to a judge 101 or have a buddy call a judge and try to influence the judge's thought process, but you do that through amici activity. And you also do that by strategically working with specific key law firms who have relationships either in that area of jurisprudence or with that judiciary. So there are ways and different things that you can think about as building up your legal advocacy Grasstops component to mirror and support your regulatory and legislative advocacy components as well.
Oyango, there were a couple of items that you discussed that I want to touch upon. One, you talked about the stop and start. And I do want to caution those who are in attendance on this call. Sometimes you don't have the time. There's a Chinese proverb about dig the well before you're thirsty. And if you tend to have that start, stop, or your organization isn't investing resources to continue some type of a program, and we'll look at some of our tips about the importance of the continued cadence of communication. By the time you're trying to ramp everyone up, you could miss your issue. Now on the federal level, certainly as we've seen with infrastructure, things can move a little slower. The state level, you almost never have that type of luxury of time. And then the other thing as well is I've seen organizations who waited to the last minute, had to then hire maybe perhaps a law firm to bail them out on an issue, and they ended up spending significantly larger sums of money to try to defeat an issue, because typically we're willing to do that if there's pain involved, if we know something's coming. Whereas if they had invested in their people, it's like that adage of give me a fish and I eat for a meal, teach me to fish and I can eat continually. So, and just to share some of my experiences, one of my clients, the American Farm Bureau Federation, so believes in Grasstops. They actually have two Grasstops programs. One is the grassroots outreach team, and one is the partners in advocacy leadership. With both of those programs, they bring them into Washington, D.C., and we actually conduct about a 3-day training, which includes a lot of the components you heard Maria talk about. But the thing that I want to stress that's beneficial that Kimberly touched upon is the sense of building community within the community. And we saw that with the Farm Bureau Federation, where they would have an opportunity, because they came into DC, they could interact at night. And it made for stronger advocates who started to lean on one another, who started to information share, or even learn about, what's the best way to handle this, talking to this type of lawmaker. Now, the Farm Bureau also will have one of their programs that has so many modules. They even include a European module. They go overseas to do that. That's certainly a lot more investment. But one of my clients, the American Library Association, we've been running a test pilot on their Grasstops program and have conducted our trainings over the internet. We really haven't had the opportunity to get people together because by the time we got started, the pandemic was here. And this has even included interactive exercises where we assign teams among people from different states. They're working on messaging. We run through different videos. And I really want to stress that importance of building the community within the community, because not only do we hear that government affairs is often a loss leader for dollars and cents within an organization, but when you build that sense of community, now you're suddenly seeing those involved with government affairs renewing at a higher rate. If they're involved in a Grasstops program, they're probably going to renew at a significantly higher rate than the general member. And they're also going to be worth more to the organization, meaning that they want to attend the annual meeting that's unrelated to government affairs because their Grasstops partners will be there. And so it's a way to also sort of build a stronger organization. So I see we have some questions that are coming in. Thank you. We're going to have some time at the end to address that, although some of our questions will actually address what we're looking at. So let's look at topic 4 then. And what can each of you share about Grasstops identification and your selection process? It looks like we may have lost Kimberly, perhaps. So Maria, why don't you go ahead and lead us off on this one, please?
So for our Grasstops, the Advocacy Captain program, we did have an application process, and there was some vetting. You might think, oh, well, Grasstops, I need folks with really, strong leadership. Let me just go to my leadership folks and look, kind of out near your geographic units, and identify your presidents, your vice presidents, and folks that have already raised their hand and wanting to take a leadership role. For us at ASAE, we kind of wanted to look beyond those natural leaders and folks that were in those leadership roles, because we wanted to make our Grasstops program, the Advocacy Captains program, a role that was in supplement to those existing leadership roles, as well as in supplement even to the government relations committee chair or government relations committee contact that existed out in the geographic units. Part of that was to make sure that we had many volunteers that we could call on if an issue came up at the State House. That way we could, get somebody there to testify kind of at a moment's notice, and we're kind of expanding our network of folks in that way. But also because we wanted to continue to, as you hinted at, David, to build that culture of advocacy, to get folks excited about public policy, and have those folks eventually ascend into those leadership roles, as well as other national level roles throughout the various committee structures that existed within ASAE. That way we have a little policy finger there and everywhere. As we looked at applications and as we decided kind of who might be the right fit, we looked at a number of factors. We wanted to make sure that we had folks from a variety of technical expertise. That way they could speak to the various infrastructure issues as they cropped up, and offer their technical expertise in addition to the society's policy position on a particular issue. We also looked at their RAP index score. That was something that we collected through the RAP survey to see how they were already connected. So we looked for folks that were already naturally politically connected and would recruit from that pool of advocates as well, because they already had a little bit of political capital that they could leverage. And then we looked at different pieces of demographic data. Where were they in their career trajectory? We looked at gender information. We wanted to make sure that we had a diverse pool of advocates, that folks that we were bringing in reflected their state, reflected their districts, and would be, good stewards of the message.
Great. Thank you for that, Maria. I see that Kimberly has been able to come back in and join us. Kimberly, this is a perfect time. If you are ready to, we'd like you to share a little bit about your Grasstops identification and selection process, if you would, please.
Sure, and that'll be very easy because we don't get to identify them. They are given to us. They are elected by our state and regional associations. So we don't get to pick, so to speak. However, I think in our work, our everyday work, you learn who really has an interest and an acumen for advocacy work. And very often those folks, even once their tenure is over, being on the board, being on a state leadership chapter, they stay involved. And so we've been able to develop a deep bench. And so we know, okay, even though so-and-so is the president of Oklahoma, if we want to get to Tom Cole, we need to call such and such, because that's the person who really knows him well and knows his office. Just as an example.
Well, just out of a question there, Kimberly, you're talking about maybe who knows who, relationship-based advocacy. Is that something that you're able to keep track of in your head, or that you try to keep track of in your head? Or is that something that perhaps you're using surveys? Maria mentioned using a piece of software called the RAP Index. There are other ways. I know Fiscal Note has some packages that allow you to conduct surveys. Are you trying to maintain that by memory, or do you actually fill out a database on that?
We are doing this based on this. And we're fortunate in that our team, I would probably say the average tenure for one of our senior team members is 15 years. And so, in our community, there tends to be, although it's changing somewhat, generally when people do this work, we always joke, if you've been doing TRIO work for 5 years, you're in it for life. And so people tend to stay around. And so it's not infrequent that we'll have a government relations team meeting and we'll say, well, who do we know in Oregon? And we'll call somebody in and say, do you know such and such? Do you think they'd be good at this? And so we really draw upon the institutional knowledge of our senior leaders. And many of our staff come from the field, so they know their peers from back home. So it's not the most scientific way about doing it. It is truly organic.
That's helpful. And again, what I love about our panelists today is we have 3 individuals from 3 very different organizations that I think can represent the spectrum of attendees that we may have on today's call. So Oyango, I'd like to address this question to you, please, if you can give us a little bit of information on how your process is run.
Yeah, so 3 different levels. At the primary level, you have our members and their employees, their executives, their retirees. When it comes to our members, employees, and as most members, they're very, very protective of their employees. So we have to be very, very mindful of that. But the executives themselves and our government affairs folks, or representatives from the member companies, they're pretty politically savvy. So it's not a lot of hand-holding or training we have to do. It's more or less the communication on the messaging and the issue at hand. So selecting them really comes down to, what is the issue? Does the issue impact a certain segment of the industry? Does the issue impact the entire industry? And usually that's when we obviously get the most engagement. And after deciphering that, the selection process really dictates itself out of that primary group. Out of the secondary group, it's what I call our affiliates. And I talked about that very briefly earlier. Our affiliates are hundreds of members, more small dollar contributors. There are vendors, our suppliers, people who support and are around the industry in some way, shape, or form. or those who are outside the industry but believe in the sustainability and the components that the industry is fighting for. Those are more or less a lot consist of, or individuals rather within that group, within that segment, kind of mostly consist of that policy position army. But there are some key folks who have rose to the top that we've identified through their interaction and through their engagement. So again, that selection process is nothing scientific, like Kimberly indicated. It's more or less they rise to the occasion through our legislative days, or they take an active stance by participating in the political action committee and always wanting to be engaged and be involved. And you pick those people up and you run with it because they have the energy and the will to be engaged in the process. The third, or tertiary rather, level consists of those partnerships that I talked about earlier. Labor, the business community, other affinity groups, people from historically marginalized groups within the community. And we learn of those individuals through various mediums, whether it's community forums, or we reach out or they reach out through our Black Chamber of Commerce or our State Chamber of Commerce or other related organizations. And selecting those individuals really comes down to a meeting of the minds, because they may agree on some components that we believe in on a particular issue, but not necessarily all. So you try to find that nucleus or that common ground and work those issues together, and then identify those people who have key relationships with policymakers, galvanize those individuals, and get your key messages, your key messaging together, and begin to start pounding the pavement, having the meetings and doing what you need to do in order to get the issue resolved in our favor. So that's really, again, nothing scientific. Our manager oversees this whole process. We have a full-time staffer that's specifically dedicated to partnerships and engagement. And she is phenomenal at keeping track of these relationships and all of these various groups. We don't invest in a software package yet. To your earlier question to Kimberly, I think she might do it the old way through Excel or maybe a Microsoft Word document, but it's a way to keep track of it. I think we do have to invest in some type of knowledge management system, because if she decides to leave us, we're stuck, right?
Absolutely. So I now that we've heard from our all-star panel today, we get to hear from all of you. During the session today, we've been collecting your questions. I want to note there's still time to submit a question. I'm certain if people haven't typed this is on the tip of everyone's tongues. What kind of resources need to go towards something like this? Does this require a large budget? I don't know if anyone wants to lead on this necessarily, if you have ideas on this, but who would like to step in and answer what kind of budget are we talking about in these programs?
So I'll jump in and start, because I think mine's is a little bit more, might be rather, I can't assume, but might be a little bit more simple than Maria's and Kimberly's. They have a very robust program. I think we're talking for everything that I outlined, it's $200,000 to $300,000 a year. I think if we wanted to up our game on that training component, we'd probably add another $200,000 to $300,000 to be at about $500,000, $600,000 on an annual basis a year budget. But remember, that's covering 5 states. It's not just for like one state, or it's not a national program, but it's covering 5 states and being effective in all 5 of those states. I think we're talking about a $500,000 program. Can you do it at a more scalable or affordable rate? Yeah, you can. The question really becomes on how deep are your issues and what type of impact you're really trying to have from a Grasstops perspective.
Great. Maria or Kimberly, Kimberly, why don't you go ahead and jump in, please?
I would say, I don't have our actual budget figure as far as line items for what we spend on government relations. I will say that we as an organization view our mission as very advocacy driven. That's actually why we were founded. We were founded by educators who felt disenfranchised and wanted to have a voice in Washington. And so that ethos runs through the course of everything we do. So while there might only be I'll use the figure Oyango pulled out, $500,000, let's say, as far as a GR budget, and only, if you include me, well, no, don't include me. So we only have 2 full-time staff who work on government relations. Myself and the president are also engaged. but that's only a portion of our time. We do outsource to a few different consultants who work with us because of, as was mentioned earlier, their relationships coming from the Hill. We view it as something we as an entire organization are responsible for. And so everything from membership services to our professional development, we know that we have to treat our members as advocates and deal with them as such. And so everyone in our office knows that you're on the front line if you're talking to our community, because we're going to be calling those same people, whether it's to ask them for contributions to the association, right, for our campaign, annual, capital campaign, or whether it's to do advocacy. So we try to operate with that in mind. So it's not limited just to the actual dollars, but in terms of the spirit of how we function as an organization.
Okay. Maria, do you have any insight you'd like to provide on this, please?
Sure. While I can't, share the specific figures, I unfortunately did not retain that bit of information in my brain as I transitioned from ASAE. But in my prior role with them, I was a full-time grassroots person. So I managed our key contact program, our advocacy captains program, our GR university program, as well as our overall advocacy campaigns. So, all of the emails, all of the newsletters, and all of the sort of written collateral that needed to go out the doors to our advocates. So that, was a lot of my day to day at the organization. And I did rely very heavily on a number of software programs, of which there are many out in the world to accommodate just about any budget, but we had a software tool for our issues advocacy, for all of the email campaigns that we wanted our members to take action on, to manage through an action center. We also, as I mentioned, relied on the WRAP index tool to really get a sense of the political capital that was out there among our membership, and be able to, I think, as Oyango mentioned a little bit earlier, play a matchmaker and do a little bit of a dating game and figure out the right advocate to pair with the right member of Congress or state legislator. So that certainly does have a cost associated with it as well. And then, putting together the training program, developing the Government Relations University curriculum, and kind of partnering with groups like Congressional Management Foundation, using resources from ASAE and other organizations that sort of do the train the trainer sort of programs, if you will. That all, of course, has a cost associated with it. So depending, I think, on where an organization is and what they're looking to do in terms of starting a program, it's probably done on a bit of a shoestring budget. And as the program grows and you need to kind of bring in other management tools, the budget, of course, will have to grow with it.
Yeah, and I can sort of chime in on my experiences. The first thing I would say, it's not a lot like PAC. I know sometimes with the Political Action Committee, it's either go big or go home. I would suggest you need to learn a little bit about your culture and what's going to work within your culture. It also depends on, are you going to have your program be centrally located 100% within the national or your state organization, or do you have chapters that you can tap into to help you with advocate recruitment, training, understanding who has relationships? I would caution you to try to not use a software program not really geared toward government affairs to try and track relationships and your best advocates. You do sometimes need to make a bit of an investment. When I was at the Society for Human Resource Management, I was the only staffer handling the Key Contact Program and Grassroots. I also had a fairly significant travel budget because we were going around the country conducting face-to-face trainings. I actually laced my trainings with questions to have an idea of who might be knowledgeable about HR issues, who is not afraid to speak publicly, how eloquent do they sound when they're asking questions. So by the time a training session was over, I already knew 5 people in the room that I was going to select.